Okay, so welcome to our Pan-African series, another episode. And this episode is still on the same topic of what Pan-Africanism is and why it's important that we have to relive these ideals. And today I have my colleague, Dr. Mutombo Nkulu-Nsenga. I hope I pronounce your name well. Correct. And I'm going to have him introduce himself and, of course, give us some background to the idea of Pan-Africanism. So, welcome, Dr. Mutombo.
Thanks so much, Dr. Marie, for asking me to participate in this important educational series. My name is Mutombo Nkulu-Nsenga. I was born and raised in Central Africa, precisely in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the country of Patrice Lumumba, one of the major leaders of Pan-Africanism, along with
Yes.
Then I went to Europe, where I studied in Italy, and France, came to the US in Philadelphia, where I did my PhD, and I've been teaching at CSUN, here in Los Angeles, which is California State University, Northridge. I'm a tenure professor. I've been here since 2003.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. You and I are Pan-Africanists. So essentially, we have a lot of passion when we talk about Pan-Africanism. But there are many people out there who do not know what Pan-Africanism is all about. So why don't you begin by just defining what Pan-Africanism is?
Thanks so much. Let's see. Pan-Africanism, for scholars, the word pan means all, from Greek. So Pan-Africanism is can call it a philosophy, a movement, an ideology, which simply means that for Africa to survive, we need unity. First of all, in the continent, and of course with people of African descent in the US, in the Caribbean, etc. Now, to understand the emphasis on the concept of unity, one has to look at the historical situation. Africa was reduced, let's say, caught in the triangular slave trade since the Renaissance, with when Portugal, Spain were the superpower at that time. And it has been said that what we call a Renaissance in Europe was in fact the beginning of nightmare for Africans. A Renaissance, allow me just to give the context.
Yes.
Europe had flourished since the time of ancient Greeks. Greece collapsed, Rome took over. The Roman Empire of the West collapsed around 476. What happened is that the development which had been created at that time with, as we know, development of what we call democracy in Greece and science and philosophy, all these things which came from kilometer squares. In the case of Rwanda, for instance, between 2030 and Rwanda with around 10 to 15 million people, the territory is small. And then, of course, we know what happened. So Africa is highly divided. And to survive, to fight colonialism, let's say, it's impossible for a small country, even just to fight to gain independence. It was difficult. So unity was necessary. Of course, we know, I'm sure you have done that with the previous programs. We had many intellectuals from the Caribbean here in the US, Du Bois and Marcus Garvey, and then some in England and Nkrumah who came from Africa, etc. So these early intellectuals, they understood that Africa could not be independent without this unity.
Yes.
And so it started then as a political movement of unity to fight for independence. First, it was to fight slave trade, and now to fight colonialism, to be independent. By the way, it culminated in the creation of the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa in 1963, which has become African Union today. So that was the goal. So fragmentation, weakness, oppression, exploitation, political, cultural, etc. And therefore, to survive, then it was understood that, by the way, the objective was to create the United States of Africa, because Nkrumah had been in the US. But of course, we know things where Messier didn't succeed. Then we got to this African Union as an organization. But it's not only a political movement, it requires also the unity of mind and hearts, which are all things that colonial education dismantled. So Africans became like foreigners to each other.
And I think that was the intention of colonialism, to kind of divide the Africans so that we can work together.
Yes, like the ancient because people then become weak.
Yeah, and it seems as if it is a trap in which Africa fell, and all the African leaders don't seem to notice that challenge. They don't work together. And of course, when we talk of colonialism, we're going to talk about neo-colonialism.
Yes.
Where even though these masters, these Europeans left, they somehow did not even leave, because their structures were left in place, and then they found a way of controlling African leaders.
Yes. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's when you talk about neo-colonialism. When I saw the question you asked me, why does it matter? Today, it's simply, let's say, the oppression, exploitation of Africa is not over. I mean, we had slave trade, we had colonialism, now we have neocolonialism. Some would even say other forms of slavery, so to speak. And because of that, one thing I wanted to point out from the beginning at this stage is that when we look at the situation in the world today, which country has a future? The countries which do have a future, first of all, is the US. It's a large country, if I'm not mistaken, around 9 million square kilometers. Then China, Canada, in terms of size, area size, in that range. Then you look in the south, you have Mexico, you have Brazil, especially, large countries. In Eurasia, of course, the largest is Russia. 17 million square kilometers. Is the largest country in the world. And then you have China. And in Europe, what you have is Germany. It's not for no reason that Germany became important. Although the territory is smaller than that of France, but the population. So it's either a country has a large surface area, which means possibility of natural resources. Or it has an abundant population. So that's the case of Nigeria, for instance. It's not very big. I mean, Congo, Algeria are bigger than Nigeria, but it's the only country with more people, more than 200 million on the continent. And by the way, Germany is more than France. They are 83 something million, while France is in the range of 68, etc. So the territory and the large population matter. They do matter for the survival of nations and the people within those nations. So because of that, today, let's say, Africa is facing, again, a rivalry. I mean, as you know, Dr. Marie, in the past, it was the labor of Africans. So they took slaves, to grow coffee, sugar, cane, cotton, these things which made during the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Well, during the colonial time, because of the Industrial Revolution, then it was Europe has machines, they need minerals. So now Africans have to stay on the continent and work, not only mineral, but other natural resources. I recall, if you remember well, we had genocide in Namibia, but one of the largest was in the Congo, King Leopold, because when the automobile industry developed the automobile, we needed rubber for tire.
Yes.
And for this rubber, almost half of the population of the Congo was wiped out. A British activist wrote a book, Edmund Morel, titled precisely Red Rubber. The way today we talk about red diamond.
Yes.
So my point is that now we do have this new, I think it's fourth industrial revolution now with IT, but we had electronic, now we are moving into this artificial intelligence and all these other things. We have our cell phone, etc. They require lithium, cobalt, coltan, and many of these minerals, including rare earth. So these things you find in Africa. Rare earth we have a lot in China, etc. But bottom line is that because of natural resources, we see Russia being interested in Africa, European Union, China is now present. And now suddenly the US says, hey, China are taking over, so let's go back. So in one way, we are becoming again the battlegrounds, which means that Pan-Africanism is more than ever needed today, again, if we are going to face these huge powers that we have in front of us.
Yeah. If you ask me, it seems as if they are scrambling for Africa again.
Yeah.
Like what they did in 1884 is being repeated again.
Yes,
and then of course Africa and Africans are the grass, the Africa. And when the elephants fight
the grass suffer.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually I have a student of mine who is actually working on a dissertation in Namibia. And he's writing on genocide that was by Germany.
Exactly. Wow, interesting.
Exactly. And this was duplicated in different parts of Africa, Namibia, Tanzania, or Tanzania as well, and of course your country, because of these resources. And they were very brutal in the way they treated Africans.
Yes.
But the major problem that we are finding is this division. Uniting African leaders is really difficult, given that they are not independent thinkers, essentially. They are essentially dependent on aid from these foreign countries that are scrambling for the continent, which makes it so difficult to have them work together and really even trust what it is they're saying. Now, we were looking at Rwanda, for instance, and hoping that Rwanda is leading the way. But Rwanda is now caught up in this Congo crisis.
Yes. It's good that you are raising this. I saw this lady, she's very vocal. She does YouTube. I don't know if I can the name, I forget. She's very interesting. She said that the US cutting, the USAID aid.
Yes.
She says it's good for Africa. Let the US take away the money, because now all these leaders, who do not pay attention to take care of their own people, instead of going to hide their money in Swiss banks, now they can develop. Yes, I think you are raising a very important issue. Is I remember people often say, look, China in the 60s, had a GDP more or less equal to that of Ghana. I'm not sure if the data are correct. The four tigers of Asia, they were very underdeveloped, and suddenly they have emerged. But Africa is the only continent which is thinking. I would say yes and no. If one looks at the situation of China, people talk about the century of humiliation. When you look at China, was not even conquered entirely. You had the Portuguese over here, some people in Shanghai, and some pieces. Of course, even the palace was burned down in Beijing. But you did not have this wide-ranging kind of colonization in China. And look also the time period. If they had 100, even if one can go to the Renaissance, some pocket already had been occupied by the Portuguese, but still. So Africa had this slave trade, which took able bodies out, many. disorganized societies because people had to run away from towns, let's say large villages, to hide in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that for almost 300 years, and now come colonization.
Yeah.
See, and then of course we got the colonial education. Colonial education, I mean, you can see today we speak French and English, and few people speak Portuguese in Angola and Mozambique. Africa is highly influenced by Western colonial education. It's the only continent divided into Francophone and Anglophone.
Mm-hmm.
It's the continent divided according to foreign religion, to some degree, Christianity and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Large, but I think traditional people are like 10% now. So when you look at all these things, and the elite has been trained either in the US and in England, former colonial powers, England, Belgium, etc., in Europe, or in Africa, but in a system of education which was designed and maintained by intellectuals who were educated in that system. So it is I'm saying this is not an excuse. It simply means that the struggle of Africans is tougher to fight what we call colonization of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And moreover, as you said clearly, there is still neocolonialism. I mean, an African president who wants to be autonomous from France and yet has his money in European banks. You understand what happens?
Yeah.
Money can be frozen in a second, and we have this thing. So, as you say, we kind of got independence of the paper, or a piece of paper, but the reality is that we do not control our economies, and our leaders are not really free in that regard. So, just to throw a number to clarify these things, the whole African continent, now we are 1.4 billion people around. We account only for around 3% in world economy. 3% that's the economy of France or England. Here we talk about the whole continent. And also, you can see India is a kind of an interesting situation because it's a small country, but it has a large population. Canada is a large country with few people, around 38 to 40 million. So India is only 3 million square kilometers, and they are 1.4 and something. Now they are the largest. They superseded China. Africa is 30 million square kilometers. And even if we were to take out the Sahara Desert, Namibia, and some other, that would be around 10 million square kilometers, which means we still have 20 million square kilometers where Africans can. So Africa cannot be said to be underdeveloped because of overpopulation. This has been said over and over, but I'm sure, as you said, this colonial heritage, and of course the fact that colonization didn't leave completely. So we just, Europeans were replaced by new colonialists with blackface, so to speak.
Yes.
That happened with our elite and our leaders.
Yeah, I think Professor Ali Mazrui really describes the situation of Africa and how essentially, even though we are independent, we rely heavily on the Western countries, the very countries that colonized us. And so essentially, we are still under colonialism. And that makes it so difficult to really try to change things and even unify, because when you're controlled by someone else, it makes it so difficult for people to control. So I know we have the African Organization Union. I wonder how effective it is in trying to bring African leaders together.
I think it's almost like what we had during the time of Nkrumah. They are divided in the African Union. So one thing is for sure, like coming back to issues we were raising, you know that the African Union is financed by the European Union. So if you function with European money.
Yeah.
Who said, one of my professors had a sense of humor. He said, do you know the golden rule? Whoever has the gold fix the rules.
Yes.
So Europeans are learning it the hard way now. I mean, they complain about, well, if the US is protecting you completely,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
spending its own money, and then you stand up, you insult the US, and, come on. So
That's
just
true.
be realistic. I mean, you can develop yourself with your own means, as long as you depend on other people's technology, finances, etc. Yeah, you can be an activist, but just kind of kabuki theater.
Yeah.
I think the issue is that I think this is why some young Africans did welcome the change we got in West Africa with Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. Those youngsters, they're trying to take things in their own hands and free themselves from France, which has controlled this. British left to some degree.
Yes.
Heavy British military presence in the economy, but France still controlling the money, France CFA and all these things. So even though, of course, people say, oh, they are being helped by Russia, but that's just the situation. Everyone has to be helped by somebody who is powerful. When Mandela was fighting in South Africa, he had help from China. And if I'm not mistaken, even Russia. So, but the point is, these countries are kind of they had the power to break from excessive French control. Now they are charting their own course. But it comes back to that. It's if the leader are still controlled by former colonial powers, there is very little they can do. But in West Africa, they have a joke. They call them African presidents in former French colony. They are like préfets or governors. They're just governors governing these polities on behalf of France.
On behalf, yes. Yes. And I think that's the challenge. All countries are just like human beings. We realize that we need to depend on each other.
Yes.
I think the only problem is when one country takes advantage of the other country.
Exactly.
And of course, we can still have relationships with these European countries. What is difficult to do is to cultivate a relationship where they respect Africans' autonomy. In spite of continuing the relationship without necessarily forcing African leaders to do stuff. And we can compare this with other countries as well. Look at Ukraine right now.
Yes.
Ukraine is essentially leaning on the US to assist in this conflict they're having with Russia. But of course, with the Trump, I think the situation is even more difficult for Ukraine. All these countries come together because they know we need each other. No one country can be dependent.
Exactly.
Essentially, even in Africa, we want to try and have those kind of relationships without necessarily feeling that we have to bend the knee to whoever is more powerful. And I think that's the conversation that is really difficult to have.
I think what you say is very true, but that's the new situation of Pan-Africanism today. We live in a global society, and it's impossible to cut ties with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
By the way, here I remember that we said a new vision of Pan-Africanism is the fact that if it's true with modern science and research done in your country, in Kenya, Tanzania, and here at Berkeley in genetics, if it's true that all human beings came from Africa, then it means that Americans, Russians, Ukrainians, Chinese, Korean are just extended cousins of Africans. I'm talking in terms of just philosophy and spirit.
Yes.
And we live in this global society. People have been traveling and studying here and there. You already have marriages between Africans and many people in China, here in the US, etc. So the idea of developing oneself in radical opposition to that's not what is needed. What is needed is, I think the West is talking about that. The French, they talk about strategic autonomy. And Ursula von der Leyen, she has been talking about de-risking. Let's trade with China, but we should not rely too much on China. And
yes.
we see that in American discourse. I mean, what is this whole business of technological sanction? Because the US is depending on China in some sense, and China depends on the US. By the way, despite the rivalry, they continue to trade.
They do, right?
To support what you say.
Yes.
It's not a matter of breaking. We live on this small planet together. In our world, we thrive together or we sink together. I mean, that's the situation. So in this global society, of course, we have human rights charter. We understand these things. But the issue is, if people are not participating in the welfare of a nation, I mean, it's the same thing you see in nations here, the rise of xenophobia in the US, in Europe, even in Africa. I mean, we had cases in South Africa, or even in our own countries, one ethnic group against another. So if there is wealth and only one group of people is benefiting, that creates tension. And then you raise this issue in some way. Africa is in a dire situation. That situation, because we are too dependent. When I say a whole continent having just 3% of world economy, I mean, we have gold. You know, world currency is based on gold reserve, even though for some time some stuff changed here in the US, but still gold is there. And we have all these minerals, and we only account for 3% of.
Yeah, there's a problem with that. There's definitely a problem with that situation, and I think that's how African leaders need to come up and find a way of resolving that tension as to why Africa is doing very bad when we have all these resources that everybody else wants to take advantage of. I think that's where the situation is. So one of the questions we were looking at is, why is Pan-Africanism relevant today? And I'm asking in terms of thinking about the youth.
Yes.
And then the need of the youth learning about Pan-Africanism so they understand the context within which different countries relate, and maybe understand the place of people of African descent in this complex relationship that we live in. How can the youth participate in this, promoting these ideals of Pan-Africanism in universities, in colleges, in high school, so that they can understand? I think this is really important. If we have to transform Africa, we have to start with educating everybody about what we all need to do to contribute to this, to improving our situation.
No, I think what you say is very important, but I think it comes to issues of decision makers, because as you know, this Pan-African, we often hear about it, but few people had systematic courses in school. You know, our school, may I learn a little bit in courses of philosophy, but quite often it's not taught. I mean, I see now there are young people who set up their own, YouTube, and they talk about it. But just because of what they clearly see as exploitation from the West and from corrupt African leaders. By the way, in that sense, China has contributed with this low-cost telephone. Many Africans are on WhatsApp. So they see they see what is happening in the world, and I really have hope that youngsters, because for me the leaders are afraid, Dr. Marie. African leaders are afraid because whoever has money here, it can be frozen in a second. And if you take, let's say, this new situation here, Europe is panicking. Okay, Europe is panicking, and they cannot face really competition with the US or China, let alone with Russia. So what are they going to go? They're talking about building the army, etc., a strong army and weapon. Europe does not have enough natural resources. So what they will do, they will go to Africa, prop some tyrant, they can control. When you have a democratic parliament, you can't. So it's easier for any power that wants to control to promote strong men and support behind the scene a dictator. And often is always dictate. He's a dictator, but our dictator. So people fight other people who violate human rights, but as long as the guy is serving the cause. So it comes to the issue you raised about Rwanda. Rwanda, after the genocide, people will recognize that Rwanda is, if you travel there, it's by far well organized than Congo, for instance. And yet Rwanda has a few natural resources. It's an open secret that the minerals being sold by Rwanda come from DRC. This is very well known. But I think what is terrible now is this tension between Rwanda and Congo. The expertise of Kagame could have helped other African countries forward. But now it seems, at least if you listen to some Congolese and even some Westerners, Rwanda is like the NATO arm in Africa. It is a branch of NATO, European NATO. I'm saying this because the European Union signed a memorandum of whatever understanding for cooperation with Rwanda on strategic minerals. There's a little thing also with Congo. So if you look at, there are many weapons, I think also, if I'm not mistaken, Poland signed some agreement, cooperation with Rwanda in military area. So they're getting all this weaponry from Poland, even a drone from Turkey. Rwanda is armed to the teeth, seriously. And now it's creating that tension. Last time we even had tension between Rwanda and South Africa because of Congo. This is terrible. Because instead of coming together to fight for the survival of the continent, but we are going again to go back. We were reduced into slavery because of inner fighting. Two kings are fighting, you fight your cousins, so they support you to over to other, and then after they control you too. So now we are having, it's almost like history repeats itself. We can just, for religions, we say, let's just pray that God can enlighten us or youngsters to see the situation and then maybe try to change the paradigm.
It's sad that you mentioned religion as a solution when is it Mbiti or Kenyatta who actually said that they brought the Bibles for us to read, and as we are reading the Bible, they took the land. And
absolutely.
So religion became a tool that they used to control us. And it's amazing that we have to turn to religion for liberation, and it's difficult. I do understand the situation for Africa is complex, but we need some hope. We need some gleam of hope, and not just...
Look, that's what I meant with, you're right, not religion, talk about spirituality.
Yes.
In that regard, yes. Look, Christianity, the way it has been placed in Africa, it came with people wearing the colonial helmet, completely. There is a famous thinker from Cameroon, Ibusi Bulaga. He wrote Christianity Without Fetishes. When you read that book, you find all these things. Christianity has been part of the global colonial capitalist system. It helped, to make people accept. In that sense, it became real opium.
Yes.
So, absolutely. We need a decolonized spirituality. Because colonization affected not only the economic sphere and political sphere, but also culture, languages, spirituality, religion, indeed. You're absolutely right at that point.
Now, I didn't have this question as we started the session, but I just want to find a way of looking. We've been talking about Africa. Can you maybe say something about the challenges of people who live in the diaspora? And what are some of the challenges that they are encountering in the diaspora that also need Pan-Africanism ideals to survive?
I think the diaspora, by the way, the movement, when it started here in the diaspora, they understood that African American, let's say people of African descent here, the destiny, let's say, depended also on the destiny of the continent. For instance, the negative view that colonialists had about Africa affected them. For instance, thinking that they're incapable of doing things, they came from the jungle, etc. So when you change, when Africa is flourishing, you have universities and people, who do good things, it does also affect people here in that regard. But I think one thing which has been said, I don't know if, I think former president of Ghana, it was to facilitate African American who want to move to the continent to go freely without a visa, for instance, set up their own businesses. I mean, look, if you look at the situation, European, Germans and Russians, British, Canadian, they used to come to the US easily. People American Jews can go to Israel easily, back and forth. So, and that helps people to do certain things. By the way, those who have skills here can help over there. And those who do not have space here, then they can have a space there, land, and to set up the business. I think the solidarity between people in the diaspora on the continent is something important for both people in the diaspora here and for the continent also. If I'm not mistaken, didn't the African Union define this diaspora like another space of continent, so to speak?
Actually, they came there. Of course, they broadened the definition to include other people who migrated for other reasons other than slavery.
Yes. But also, just to be precise, is because we face the same hardship and the same prejudices. I mean,
it was Du Bois who said that the Negro problem, problem is the African problem.
Yes.
And you cannot understand the Negro problem until you understand the African problem. And in a way of trying to challenge people who lived in the diaspora to realize that all these forms of discrimination and other issues they were facing are rooted in the way people in Africa were treated. And so you have to go back to Africa, Sankofa.
Yes, absolutely.
Sankofa. Go back to Africa to understand why you're going through what you're going through over here.
Yes. No, I think the issue of racism is a critical point where really people on the continent and here face the same. By the way, the George Floyd movement became global quickly. And, Europe, African living in Europe, identified, and even on the continent to some degree. Yes, I think it's just a de facto situation that what African American around 12 to 14% here is a large diaspora. I mean, because simply we know scientifically racism do not exist per se, but sociological element of racism is there.
It is.
And, because of that, so African Americans are viewed as Africans to some degree.
Yes.
So the negative view, I think Malcolm X who said that. He said, why should the black man in America care about the continent? He said, you cannot hate your roots without hating the tree.
That's true.
He said, during the colonial time, European scholarship and politicians projected an image so negative that it became negative to you and me, and nobody wanted to be considered as an African. He said, in so doing, then we end up hating ourselves. So I mean, you know those things.
Yes.
Like some people in Ethiopia who say they are not African, but the dynamic of global racism, so to speak. But bottom line is that, yes, that connection is there historically because people came from the continent. And because in a world where racism exists, still an African American cannot change his color.
Yes.
I mean, look, if Jews who look like European, many of them have suffered, and continue to suffer, then what can happen to African American? I think it's Du Bois also who said that.
Exactly.
You can't change the color of your skin. Therefore, it's better to assume your own identity as an African. Which, by the way, you remind me of something. There is Pan-Africanism, but there are various schools of thought also who are connected to Pan-Africanism. For instance, Afrocentric movement of Professor Asante in Philadelphia.
Yes.
And you see, and they even promoted this issue of changing names. Asante used to be Smith, changed his name. So African American giving African name today. So the issue of identity and connecting to one's roots, by the way, in which the movie Roots from the book, it seems that played a major role, even for many Americans starting to look for their roots.
Yes.
Because also, if you just come here, I came from Europe, but which Europe? Say, I came from Scandinavia, which country? So people have a longing, to identify their roots in that regard. So,
yeah, speaking about roots, it's all about culture. And one challenge Africa and people of African descent have faced is the need to reclaim their own culture. And because that was demonized through colonialism and through evangelization. So the need to reclaim your culture is very important. In Swahili, we have a proverb that says, "Muacha mila ni mtumwa." Essentially, if you give up your culture, you become a slave.
A slave, yes.
So you've given yourself away. So, and thinking roots reminded people that you need to understand your roots, you need to understand your culture. And that comes with values that we need to reaffirm and to have our youth embrace them so that we continue that Afrocentricity that he talks about. I want to use the word Ubuntu.
Yes, Ubuntu, yes, absolutely.
Yes, we want to reaffirm those values that connect us as the same people, the same Bantu in my language, the same people. So reclaiming that is part of what Pan-Africanism is all about, learning to accept who you are, accept and love your own culture, because that's what makes you who you are.
I'm glad that you are raising this issue of culture, because identity is shaped by the culture largely, and people lose culture and they lose historical memory about their own ancestry is very, very problematic. There is an expression that scholars have been using. In French, we say paupérisme anthropologique. It's anthropological poverty. That Africans are not only poor because the natural resources, the economy, everything is stolen from them, but the culture, the being a human being, so
yes,
and that came from demolishing culture. Or you don't have language, you have dialect. You have to change your name. You need a Christian name. You are Goy, not Goy. You have to be Rachel or Rachel. You know, this kind of thing. By the way, in which religion played a major role, at least Christianity, in producing alienation. So somebody lives as if they were foreigner to themselves. So that's what the whole concept of alienation. By the way, we see, why do we have such a reaction, whether here let's say this conservative reaction in the US and Europe is still longing for identity. People don't want to be lost in this vague global village. But they want to be in the global village, but being themselves, so to speak. But the irony is that European, American, they do that, but they don't want African to do the same. It's like France, they say, oh, strategic autonomy. We need to be autonomous from the US and China. But because they want to control African economy, they do not want Africans to have strategic autonomy. So I don't know these things, yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you too long, but we've really discussed some very important issues on Pan-Africanism. And of course, there are many strands, as you know, Pan-Africanism as an ideal, as a movement, and there's so many personalities who led this movement. Patrice Lumumba, you just talked about him, and I'm like, we need to have a session on him and what he did for Africa. just to promote this education on this particular topic. So thank you so much. And if you have your last words, please.
Just in terms of last word, the question you asked me about the youth, Dr. Marie.
Yes.
I think it's a long process. Number one is people have to know each other. Now, the way African states were set up, you know that it was easier for anyone to travel from any African country to Europe than going to another African country. Just the infrastructure did not. If people were, especially young people, if they were moving around easily, they make friends here, they marry over there. So first of all, you just to see people like you.
Yeah.
And the colonization tried just to break that. So I think I know there is this notion of building, I don't know if it's a railway or from Cape to Cairo.
Yes.
I don't know if it's a highway or things. I mean, infrastructure should be organized so that Africans can travel easily and get to know each other. By the way, the OAU, I think we just should cancel the visas. Cheikh Anta Diop had an idea to have a Pan-African university with branches in various countries, like law school here, medicine over there. So young people would be moving around and getting to know each other, intermarrying, etc. So then they become, that will help, because unity has to be also emotional and psychological. It's not just something abstract.
That's true.
I remember, and I'm going to finish with this statement by Nyerere, who had a sense of humor. He said, yes, we should tell people that we need to build the unity, but you must make unity attractive.
True.
If unity is to say, oh, let's cancel country, we create one country, and only one ethnic group is going to dominate everybody, you're not going to create unity.
Yeah.
Make unity attractive.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the role of the social media, I think, is very important. We should take advantage of that.
Oh, yes.
There are so many people who did not go to school, but they're learning a lot through
Exactly, yeah. That, by the way, helped the issue of infrastructure. You can see people, you can talk to people without traveling.
Exactly.
So that's really, this is a very something which is very used at this point.
Yes. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Dr.
Sharing a lot of ideas, and we have a lot more to discuss for next time. Thank you so much.
Asante sana.
Karibu.